Before us is a character with the appearance of a wild man, Nozaki Hitoshi. People often call him the man of the forest because of his name and his very appearance. The truth is, he now finds himself in a strange forest in another world, with only a grass skirt to cover himself. He sat by the fire he had started, staring at the food he was cooking. But how did this happen? And why him and not someone else? Was it related to the wild man image everyone associated with him? As he ate, he recalled how he had gotten into this situation. Rummaging through his memories, it all started with a truck. While on his way to work, Nozaki saw a student about to be hit by a vehicle. A strong urge welled up inside him, and he decided to save the student. Running out and pushing the student out of the way, Nozaki was unfortunately hit by the truck instead. As he lay on the road, bleeding everywhere, he began to lose consciousness. His last thought was that if he had another chance, he would choose to be reborn, and that's exactly what happened. Nozaki felt as if he were falling from the sky into an endless abyss. Everything went dark, and he passed out. Not long after, he woke up and looked up at the sky above, the leaves rustling in the wind. Clearly, he was in another world. Quickly getting to his feet, Nozaki looked around to figure out his next move. He didn't have any special abilities, nor did he have any clothes. Nozaki told himself to stay calm to assess the situation and set his priorities. After getting up, he found a large tree in the forest. With great effort, he climbed to the top of the tree and looked around to determine his next course of action. Disappointingly, all he could see was an endless stretch of forest. He wondered if it would be dangerous to travel at night, but then decided to focus on the most important priority: finding water. After securing water, he would set up a base and look for food. But first, he needed to find something to cover himself with. He took bark from the surrounding trees and tied it together to make a grass skirt. Although it felt uncomfortable, it helped him focus on survival. Nozaki silently thanked the knowledge he'd gained from the Discovery Channel for helping him retain some semblance of human dignity. Now, he was about to enter the true survival phase. Nozaki walked through the dense forest. Trying to navigate the cramped environment, he wondered if he would ever actually find a water source. Suddenly, a sound came from the bushes, making Nozaki freeze in fear. The sound stopped, and he realized that it was probably a small animal. He noticed that his eyes weren't very effective in the forest, while his ears were overwhelmed with information from his surroundings. Nozaki understood that he needed to use his ears to his advantage while searching the forest. Continuing his journey, he focused on every sound around him, until suddenly, a distinct sound rang out. Nozaki started running towards the sound, knowing exactly that it was the sound of water. Finally, he stood before the river, looking at the flowing water with a sense of awe. Nozaki stepped into the water and shouted with joy, scooping up the water with his hands and drinking it happily. But his adventure didn't stop there. Next, he needed to find shelter. So he returned to the forest, telling himself that if he wanted to find food, he needed to find a place that wasn't too close to the water source. After a short walk, Nozaki found a large, hollow tree with an entrance at about his height. This was the perfect place for him to live. He decided to stay there and sat down, starting to think about finding food. Nozaki watched his arm after rubbing some fruit juice on his skin to see if it would get inflamed. If it did, the fruit was inedible and he would have to find another kind. Luckily, he had no reaction. He started taking small bites and waited a few hours to make sure he didn't have an allergic or any other negative reaction, though he might be allergic to this fruit. Nozaki was fortunate to have many types of food around that looked edible. Now the last thing he needed to do was start a fire. He picked up a wooden stick and began spinning it against another. At first, things didn't go smoothly. In fact, he failed for several hours straight, despite trying various methods. But luckily, after a period of patience, a spark ignited, and he finally managed to create a decent fire. He called it the most beautiful fire he had ever seen. Sitting by the fire, Nozaki wondered how long it would take for him to get out of the forest. He lay down preparing to rest so he'd be ready for the hunt the next day. Suddenly, a notification box appeared before his eyes, startling Nozaki, who shot up and stared at it. The notification box displayed his status and skills. He only had a single skill, karate, but he didn't feel offended. Instead, he felt it was very fitting for him. The next day, Nozaki began his hunt. He sat on a tree branch, holding a large stick as a weapon. Waiting for an animal to walk into the trap he had set from memory, a sound echoed, and a rabbit-like creature appeared. Nozaki was disappointed by its size, thinking it was too small for the trap. The creature heard something and started to run, which was when Nozaki realized something was approaching. He looked over and saw goblins starting to emerge from the forest. He was both amazed that they were real and worried because he knew he wouldn't be able to fight them. Nozaki realized that the goblins were starting to head towards the trap he had set. He thought this might be his chance to gain some experience. A goblin approached the trap and sniffed something, and Nozaki started to worry that the trap might not work if the scent wasn't concealed. He was right. The goblins easily noticed the trap and removed the straw covering the pit, to Nozaki's astonishment. With no other choice, he jumped from the tree and swung his stick at the goblins. He easily took down one of the 3 goblins with a powerful strike, causing it to explode on impact. Looking at the remaining 2 with a determined gaze, Nozaki rushed the next one while it was still stunned by its fallen comrade, kicking it in the neck. Nozaki sends the second goblin flying. He turns to the last goblin, trying to finish it off quickly, but realizes that it's already swinging its club at him. The goblin attacks with a powerful overhead smash, creating a huge opening for Nozaki to counter. Seizing the opportunity, he punches the goblin straight in the face and sends it flying. However, the punch wasn't enough to take it down, as the goblin quickly gets back on its feet, making Nozaki think that their weak points might be different from humans. The goblin roars and starts attacking wildly, forcing Nozaki to defend desperately, knowing he couldn't go on the offensive right now. But Nozaki gets an idea. He intentionally steps on a tree root and pretends to fall. This makes the goblin think it has an opening, but Nozaki did it to bait it into launching an overhead attack. He easily dodges the blow and lands a karate chop on its neck. The goblin falls to the ground, face-planting as it dies for good. Nozaki stands there, staring at its fallen body, waiting to see if he'll gain any experience from the kill. As he stomps on the monster's heads with a cracking sound, Nozaki crushes the skulls of all 3 goblins. Nozaki continues to stare at what he's just done, until he starts trembling from shock and amazement. He's exhilarated by the fact that he's won his first battle against the monsters of this world. When night falls, he returns to his shelter and starts cooking the meat from the goblins. He also gathered some other spoils and hung them on a nearby branch, including the goblin hides that he could later use for clothing. Nozaki checks his status and realizes that he's leveled up. He looks up at the sky with a determined gaze and yells that he can overcome any hardship without a problem. Time passes, and a man is seen running through the forest, chasing a creature that looks like a young boy. He shouts for it to stop, doing his best to keep it from escaping. That man is Nozaki, and 3 months have passed since he came to this world. Since that first day, he has grown out his hair and beard and has reached level 8. Nozaki's senses grew sharper as his level increased, and thanks to this, he could predict that the animal was about to turn left. With a great leap, he lunges forward and successfully grabs the creature's leg, causing it to tumble. His physical abilities have also been steadily improving over time. Placing the animal on his back, he was about to leave when he glanced behind him and realized there were some chili plants near where he'd caught the creature, or at least something that looked exactly like them. These plants could be used to kill insects, as a disinfectant, or to restore health. Nozaki wanted to get as many of the peppers as he could. As he was picking them, he heard the sound of goblins nearby. At first, he thought they were just being noisy and that he should kill them, but then he changed his mind, figuring it wasn't worth the trouble given his level. He started to worry that he might have become the king of this forest after living here for 3 months. Suddenly, the goblins fell silent, and a loud roar echoed from a corner of the forest. Nozaki was shocked and terrified, wondering what kind of creature could make such a horrible sound, especially since for the past 3 months, goblins were the only monsters he had seen. However, what surprised him was a large creature that burst out from the shadows, wielding a sword. Nozaki believed the creature before him was an evolved form of a goblin, a hobgoblin, nearly twice the size of a normal one. Nozaki thought the hobgoblin was going to scold the other goblins for fighting amongst themselves, but that wasn't the case. The hobgoblin tightened its grip on the sword, before suddenly swinging it hard at the trembling goblins, slicing their bodies in 2. Nozaki was completely stunned, his mouth agape as he realized there was no way he could kill this monster. Since coming to this world, this was the first time he had encountered a monster stronger than himself. Unfortunately, the hobgoblin saw Nozaki. It roared and chased him through the forest. For the first time in his life, he was the one being hunted. Nozaki ran as fast as he could through the forest, trying to escape the monster, but it kept following him. However, the monster began to slow down. Nozaki realized that with such a huge body, it would have trouble moving through the forest. But this wouldn't be the last time he saw it, because with the keen nose of an evolved goblin, it could easily track him down. That's when Nozaki understood that this forest was no longer safe for him. The hobgoblin would never give up until he was dead. His only choice was to leave the forest as he knew he couldn't defeat it. Though his body was trembling, he rushed back to his home and gathered everything he could and prepared to leave, saying goodbye to his first home. And so his journey began. He began to walk slowly through the forest, only stopping to rest when it got dark. Even when night fell, he was constantly on edge, knowing that monsters like the hobgoblin could appear at any moment and attack him. Every second, he carefully checked his surroundings. Each day, he crossed forests and streams, climbed mountains, searching for a new place to call home. At one point, he passed by a lake and drank some water from it. Startled to find a deer-like animal with 2 heads standing near him, drinking water while staring at him. As night fell, he sat under a tree, his head buried between his knees, shivering from the cold. He didn't know how many days had passed since he left his shelter. He just hoped to find a city soon. As he started to drift off to sleep, all he wanted was to meet another human being. The next day, he continued his journey. A leopard-like creature ran past, and Nozaki had to hide in the mud to avoid being spotted, because if he was, it would become hostile. He burst out of the mud, gasping for fresh air as mud dripped down his body. He silently thanked the mud swamp for saving his life. After washing off the mud, he continued on through the forest. As he rounded a corner, he saw something on a nearby hill and thought it might be another monster. He hid behind a bush and looked up. His eyes widened as he realized what it actually was. It was another person. He saw she was picking something up from the ground and putting it into a basket beside her. Nozaki watched the girl with surprise and admiration. She turned around and saw Nozaki trying to get her attention. The girl was startled to see him and began to look extremely worried and motioned for him not to come any closer, leaving Nozaki completely confused. The girl screamed, "Goblin!" making him even more bewildered. As he watched her start running in the opposite direction. Why was she afraid of him? He felt a pang of disappointment, as this was the first time he'd met another human, and he thought he had scared her off. But then he heard a roar and the scream of the girl who had just run away. Nozaki recognized that roar immediately and instantly ran towards the sound. It was the sound of a hobgoblin. He kept running as fast as he could, knowing it wasn't just any hobgoblin, but the very one that had been determined to kill him since they first met. Nozaki started to feel guilty for the girl captured by the monster, thinking it was all his fault for wandering in the forest for so long. Finally, Nozaki caught up to the hobgoblin. He saw it and the girl slung over its shoulder. He yelled, demanding the monster release her, but it paid him no mind. Nozaki yelled louder this time, ordering the monster to let the girl go. This time it took notice, turning back in surprise. Just as it turned, Nozaki launched himself into the air, letting out a powerful battle cry. Nozaki grabbed a vine in front of him, swinging from a branch and using it to propel himself forward at an even greater speed, steadily closing the distance to the hobgoblin. Finally, he was face to face with the monster. Nozaki slammed his knee into its face, connecting right on the nose, causing it to drop the girl. He landed on the ground without any trouble and looked up. But he was horrified to realize the monster hadn't fallen. It had only staggered slightly from the attack. Nozaki was in shock, unable to believe that after such a powerful blow, the monster was still standing. Nozaki quickly looked over at the girl who was still trying to get up after being dropped by the hobgoblin. He asked if she was okay and if she could stand. The girl confirmed she could, and Nozaki ordered her to run while he dealt with the monster. He wondered if she had gotten separated from her group, but immediately pushed the thought aside and told her to run anywhere, as long as she got away from here. She obeyed him instantly. The hobgoblin looked over, finally recovered, with blood dripping from its nose. As the girl started running in the other direction, Nozaki turned to face the monster again, with more confidence than he'd ever had since the first time he met it weeks ago. Despite his newfound confidence, Nozaki had no choice but to fight. He stared down the monster before him, readying himself for battle. He trembled as he felt his heart pound. The pressure of facing this hobgoblin was almost like he was fighting a bear. All he wanted to do was run, but he couldn't, because he had to protect the girl. Nozaki yelled, challenging the monster to come at him. The hobgoblin swung its sword at him, but Nozaki quickly dodged. He realized its attacks were heavy but had wide movements, which meant the battle would belong to whoever was faster. Nozaki decided to strike, but quickly realized it wasn't going to be easy. The hobgoblin's skin was too tough for a punch to do any damage. He knew a punch would be almost useless. Nozaki felt it was unfair that he couldn't even scratch it, while just one of its attacks could kill him instantly. He knew he needed to find a different approach. Nozaki kicked the monster right in the crotch, stunning it instantly. Seeing that the attack was effective, He quickly headbutted it, threw a few more punches, and lunged forward, jamming his fingers into the hobgoblin's eyes. The monster roared in pain, blood pouring from its eyes. Nozaki was thrilled that his attack had worked, but right after, the hobgoblin started attacking frantically, and unfortunately one of its punches landed on Nozaki. He was sent flying, tumbling across the ground. Nozaki struggled to his feet after the heavy impact, then wiped the blood off himself, looking towards the monster, which was now starting to appear as two in his blurry vision. Nozaki knew he had to find a way to take down the monster quickly, especially since it was so strong. Even though he tried to block the blows, the monster continued its ferocious assault. Finally, Nozaki realized there was only one last move that could give him a chance to win: a high kick. The monster stared at him until it suddenly lost sight of him. Nozaki dashed forward, delivering a high kick from its blind spot. He hoped this kick would bring the monster down, and as it staggered and fell, with empty eyes, it seemed like it was all over. But suddenly, the monster got back on its feet and charged forward to attack. It grabbed Nozaki and bit down hard on his shoulder, making him scream in pain, feeling as if his arm was about to be torn off. Nozaki knew he couldn't die like this. With a final burst of determination, he raised his middle finger and uttered a few defiant words, then jammed his finger hard into the hobgoblin's ear. This made the monster kick him, sending him flying into a tree. Nozaki sat there, his head hanging low, blood pouring from his shoulder and his middle finger now broken. He started to feel his consciousness fade, thinking this was the end, until he saw a tree with a chili-like fruit in front of him. This chili might be incredibly spicy, but it was the last option he had right now. He didn't know if it would save him or kill him. The hobgoblin stared at Nozaki, roared, and began to charge. Nozaki quickly swallowed the chili pepper as the monster drew closer, ready to deliver a fatal blow. But just then, Nozaki's eyes snapped open, and he quickly got up and dodged the attack. He spat the chili pepper into the monster's eye, causing it to stagger in pain. Nozaki leaped into the air, slamming his elbow and knee into the monster's head. Finally, the hobgoblin fell. Both Nozaki and the monster's corpse lay on the ground as he looked up at the sky in disbelief. He had won. He had finally won. But unfortunately, Nozaki couldn't move, having poured all his strength into the battle. Nozaki began to lose consciousness and closed his eyes until he heard someone calling his name. It was the girl's voice. She was calling out to him, asking if he was okay, but she was still calling him a goblin. He wondered who she was calling a goblin before quickly passing out again. The girl noticed he was bleeding and took him to her village. When he opened his eyes, Nozaki found himself in an unfamiliar place. He was lying in a bed, and he quickly sat up, wondering where he was. A sudden pain from his shoulder shot through his body, bringing back memories of the fight with the hobgoblin. He wondered if the girl was the one who had helped him. Nozaki knew this house belonged to humans, which meant the girl had likely brought him here. After several months since arriving in this other world, he had finally set foot in a human town. He looked around at the bed he was in, wondering if it was the same bed the girl's whole family used. Suddenly, the girl burst into the room, happy to see he was awake. Nozaki waved awkwardly, his face flushing, and mumbled that he couldn't smell anything in the house. But the girl urgently told him he had to leave immediately. Nozaki was confused until she explained that the villagers were coming and they wanted to attack him. Nozaki was stunned, asking why they would want to do that. The girl motioned for him to look out the window, and his eyes widened. As he saw the crowd of villagers gathered outside, holding pitchforks and weapons, their eyes filled with malice. He asked the girl if she was the one who had saved him. As the villagers drew closer, Nozaki asked in confusion what he had done to make them want to kill him. She explained that materials from a hobgoblin are extremely rare and can be sold for a high price. This made Nozaki realize that the villagers wanted to kill him to steal those materials. A man in the crowd told everyone to stop as he approached the door, knocking lightly and asking for the village pharmacist to open the door. Nozaki turned to ask the girl if she was the pharmacist, but she immediately signaled for him to be quiet. The girl shouted at the villagers, telling them to go home and not to touch her patient. But the man replied that they would find a way to settle things. The man went on to explain that his father, the village chief, had protected her. He scolded the girl for hitting an old woman and demanded she prove that things would be different this time. He claimed he only wanted to kill Nozaki if they couldn't get along, but both the girl and Nozaki felt it was a lie. The girl then asserted that there was no proof Nozaki was the one who killed the goblin and warned the villagers not to enter the house through the back door. Afterward, she turned back to care for Nozaki, giving him an ointment and telling him to apply it at least 3 times a day. Nozaki was about to say something, but the girl quickly told him not to worry about her, reminding him that a patient should stay quiet and listen to the pharmacist. Suddenly, Nozaki overheard the villagers talking about killing them both until one of them spoke up, saying that killing a pharmacist would cause trouble. One of the men said he would ask his father for permission to kidnap the girl and then drug her, which shocked Nozaki. They continued their discussion, saying they didn't want her to be ruined too soon. Nozaki clenched his fists, wondering if the girl could really not hear what they were discussing outside. She didn't want Nozaki to escape back to the forest. But perhaps it had to happen as she felt she couldn't protect him. She told him to be careful and thanked him for saving her. Suddenly, she ran towards the front door before Nozaki could react. He tried to chase after her to stop her, but fell to the ground in pain. The girl rushed outside, standing in front of the door to protect Nozaki. He was furious, knowing he couldn't do anything more for her, and did as she asked. Nozaki fled through the back door and back into the forest, each step becoming more difficult. He felt his strength draining away with every second. Suddenly, Nozaki heard someone call his name. The villagers had discovered he was awake and trying to escape. When he looked back, he saw they had caught the girl. One of the men called her stubborn and slapped her, saying she had deceived them. That act made Nozaki furious. The man who seemed to be the leader ordered the others to find and kill Nozaki. When the man looked up, Nozaki burned that image into his mind, determined to remember it for his revenge later. He would make them pay for hurting the girl. Nozaki ran back to the familiar forest, a place he trusted. Under the bright moonlight, he sat by a fire he had made himself, cooking. He put the food pellet into his mouth, and Nozaki thought about that man and how the villagers were harming the girl, as if it were nothing to be concerned about. He looked up at the sky, silently asking if anyone out there could help him get back home. He really wanted to escape this world. Pushing that thought aside, he went to sleep and waited for the next day. The following morning, Nozaki began to improve his new base. Seeing it was gradually getting better as his previous base had a few flaws in his opinion, he started exploring the forest, searching for more food. Nozaki discovered some plants growing underground, realizing that the vegetation of this new world was very similar to his old one. The fruit he found had tubers similar to yams underneath. Hunting would be very difficult if his wound reopened, so it was fortunate that he found a food source that would last for a few days. He planned to store food and wait for night to fall. When night came, Nozaki checked his status again. Nozaki realized that he had leveled up 2 times and developed a new skill, called Wave of Fury. After confronting the hobgoblin, he looked back on everything that had happened since he was brought to this new world. He had met humans for the first time, fought a hobgoblin, and now he was being hunted. Realizing this, he knew that the people in this world were no different from those in his old one. There were people who liked him, like the girl, and those who hated him, like the man with the scar around his eye. He silently wished for death to come to those who intended to kill him. Nozaki began to plan for the future, not only training his body but also preparing his mind for the battles to come. Nozaki wondered if he was truly ready for battle. What he didn't know was that the girl was going through something terrible, her clothes being torn off without her consent. Nozaki finally woke up, struggling to his feet after his earlier exhaustion. When he looked up, his eyes widened at the sight of a snake-like monster in front of him. He quickly grabbed its neck, neutralizing it instantly, and began to check if it could be used as food. Even though it wasn't much, he still cooked it, finally getting to eat some meat after a long time. Nozaki recalled the other man's words. He learned that the girl had come to the village with the pharmacist and his team. When the pharmacist passed away, she inherited his role, which meant she had no family or support and was isolated from the rest of the village. Nozaki pushed those thoughts aside as he needed to focus on recovering. He knew that within a week he would be able to fully recover his strength. During that time, he just hoped the girl would be safe. A week passed quickly and some animals were seen around a nearby mud pile. They heard a sound and turned around only to realize that a man was emerging from the mud pile. It was Nozaki. As the creature started to flee, Nozaki knew that his new target, that other man, was far different from a hobgoblin, and so he needed to prepare more carefully. He began to wipe the mud from his face, wondering if what he was doing was like the camouflage he'd seen in movies. Nozaki didn't want to fight if he could avoid it, so he continued forward, carrying out his plan. The time had come, and he started heading toward the village. 2 men sat in front of a house, seemingly on the lookout for Nozaki, but they believed the chances of him returning were very low. The 2 men sitting in front of the house wondered what had happened to the captured girl, not wanting to get involved in the ongoing events, hoping everything would be resolved soon. Nozaki listened from the side of the house and knew he needed to enter through the back door. When he got there, he saw a man standing guard. But luckily, there was only one. Nozaki threw a rock at the base of a tree as a distraction, then quickly leaped up and took the guy down. He successfully snuck into the house. without being detected. Inside, he saw the girl tied to a pillar. Nozaki rushed over and asked if she was okay, getting her attention. Nozaki wiped the mud from his face and said he was there to help her leave the village with him. He started to untie the ropes, but she told him she was staying, leaving him completely confused. She explained that all her patients were in the village and she believed she would be released soon, because not everyone was a bad person. As Nozaki finally managed to untie the ropes on her legs, he saw the wounds caused by the ropes. He also noticed that the ropes on her hands had loosened. She yelled at him to leave, saying there were too many men out there, and that it wouldn't end well if he confronted them. Nozaki fell silent, his head bowed low, as several villagers entered the house, ready to capture him. The man was thrilled to have finally found Nozaki, until the door flew straight towards him. Because Nozaki had kicked it open, slamming into the man's body and knocking him out. More men started flooding into the room, and Nozaki braced himself for the fight to come, his eyes filled with rage. They all rushed him at once without a moment's hesitation. And then Nozaki saw him, the man whose face was burned into his memory. The man declared that he was careless last time, but he wouldn't let Nozaki escape again. Nozaki told the guy that if he accepted his demands, he would spare his life. His demands were to not cause the girl any more harm, and to confess to everything he'd done and apologize. The man scoffed and told Nozaki to forget about it, then ordered his men to kill him. Nozaki swiftly dodged every attack, seemingly yawning as if bored by their moves. And then it was his turn to counterattack. Nozaki immediately threw a powerful punch into one of the men's faces, sending him crashing to the ground. The others checked to see if he was okay, while the man with the scar around his eye, the one burned into Nozaki's memory, decided to handle the situation himself. He declared that he would be the one to kill Nozaki. Nozaki got into his fighting stance once more, knowing the attacks would keep coming. He started to feel his senses sharpen. The man looked at Nozaki standing his ground and laughed, asking if he was really prepared for this fight. This guy was called Philip, one of the men who had caught Nozaki's attention. Philip continued his arrogant boasting until one of the men shouted his name. Philip angrily asked what the man wanted, until he saw that the one Nozaki had punched was dead from a single blow. Nozaki stood there, his eyes wide with surprise, realizing he had actually killed a person. Everyone else in the room was also shocked by his action. As Nozaki was lost in thought, he wondered if humans were really that fragile. He quickly regained his composure and said he wasn't surprised, since that guy was probably just a good-for-nothing anyway. Philip was furious that Nozaki had so easily killed one of his men without even using a weapon. Nozaki stood up again, raising his fists, ready to fight. As he started to get surrounded, he was confident he could take down everyone in the room with his fighting skills, as long as every punch landed. There were 8 men in the room. 3 of them had decent weapons, while the rest used farming tools for defense. Nozaki knew he had to rely on more than just his skills and physical condition, since he needed to be careful of their weapons. However, with the special physique of this world, they couldn't keep up with his movements. He knew he'd be fine as long as he stayed close to his enemies. Nozaki charged straight at Philip, the only one with a shield and sword. Philip tried to stab Nozaki with his sword, but he easily dodged it. Suddenly, Nozaki kicked Philip's shield, causing him to laugh mockingly at the move. Philip truly believed he could win the fight based on Nozaki's actions, until the trajectory of Nozaki's leg suddenly changed. His kick redirected and pivoted, his foot slamming into Philip's face. The kick was so powerful that Philip was completely taken down, falling to the ground, wondering how such a powerful attack could even exist. Philip was finished with just one kick. Nozaki thought about the kick he just performed and remembered it was called a Brazilian kick. But his train of thought was quickly cut short as the remaining men charged at him all at once. One of them tried to stab him with a spear, while another came up from behind and tried to slash him with a sword. The man with the spear was confident this would be the end for Nozaki, thinking he was completely unaware of the guy behind him. But he was wrong. Nozaki quickly glanced back. Nozaki quickly spun around, driving his elbow hard into the stomach of the man behind him. Then he grabbed the man's body and slammed him to the ground, finishing it by stomping his foot hard on the man's neck, making it impossible for him to get up. The others were terrified by the sight, looking like they were about to run. But somehow they stayed. Nozaki was annoyed, but he knew he could end this fight in a single move. He told the rest of them that this was going to be a bad day for them. They started rushing him without any clear plan. The man with the spear came forward, but Nozaki quickly grabbed the spear as it passed him, surprising its wielder. The man yanked the spear and ordered Nozaki to let go. And he did. releasing the spear, causing the man to stumble and nearly fall. Nozaki declared that he would do whatever it took to defeat all of them. As the spearman began to topple over, Nozaki lunged forward, landing a straight punch to the spearman's face, sending blood splattering across his fist. When the final punch landed, the remaining men had had enough and started to flee from the horrific scene and from Nozaki. Some even vomited at the sight of the blood before they fled, screaming that he was a monster. Nozaki was satisfied that he'd driven them all away. Just then, however, another man entered the area, shouting Philip's name. It was Philip's father. He asked what had happened here, and rushed to check if his son was still alive. But Philip was dead. He stood up, tears streaming down his face, and angrily asked Nozaki if he was the one who killed his son. Nozaki didn't answer Philip's father, but instead asked a question of his own. If the man before him was the one responsible. Suddenly, Philip's father ordered someone named Isekai'd to kill Nozaki for what he'd done. A man in armor stepped onto the battlefield. It turned out Isekai'd had been raised by Philip's father until now, just to prepare for this very moment. The armored man told Philip's father that he already knew, and that he would repay the debt for being saved as a child, after his own father had driven him from the city. Isekai'd drew his sword and told Nozaki that he would make for good rust on his blade. Nozaki recognized the armor as plate mail and immediately prepared for a new fight. He wondered what he was going to do, as he sensed the powerful energy coming from this new enemy, so different from the others he had faced. Moreover, Isekai'd had no openings in his stance. Nozaki knew the man before him was a strong opponent, and he began to sweat nervously. He wanted to drag the fight out into a battle of attrition. Glancing over, Nozaki saw Philip's father ordering the remaining men to bring back those who had fled, even arming the women and children because he wanted Nozaki dead at any cost. Nozaki tried to focus on controlling his breathing, as it was starting to get out of control. He took a deep breath and slowly regained his composure. Nozaki understood that if he rushed into battle, his enemy would take advantage of it immediately. He began to analyze his opponent, not wanting to miss a single detail, no matter how small. Nozaki noticed something strange about the way Isekai'd moved. His center of gravity seemed off, as if he were trying to hide his left leg. This reminded Nozaki of the time he'd suffered a knee injury and had to struggle through recovery. The knees are crucial for both offense and defense, and if that was the case with Isekai'd, Nozaki guessed that he would attack with a wide lunge, as that would be the most effective way at that range. Nozaki let out a mocking laugh at Isekai'd for not moving, suggesting he was scared. Suddenly, Isekai'd finally made his move, and just as Nozaki predicted, he lunged forward with his sword. Nozaki easily dodged it, or at least that's what he thought. He had barely managed to dodge, but the tip of the sword still grazed his neck, drawing blood. Nozaki realized just how dangerous Isekai'd was, knowing that if it weren't for Isekai'd's bad knee, he would have been killed. Isekai'd began to strengthen his defense, but Nozaki had already set his sights on his opponent's left knee. He ducked low, lunging straight for Isekai'd's leg, wrapping himself around it and bringing the man down. As he began to twist the knee joint, Nozaki knew that no matter how strong the armor was, it couldn't protect a joint from being broken. Nozaki quickly wrapped his arm around Isekai'd's neck, locking the enemy's head in his embrace. With just one powerful movement, Isekai'd went limp, his arm falling to the ground. Knowing the battle was over, Nozaki slowly stood up, releasing Isekai'd's body and gently laying him on the ground. Nozaki was stunned to realize that the day had come when he would break a man's neck, but the fight was finally over. But in truth, it wasn't completely over. He looked towards Philip's father and walked over to him. The man started backing away in fear, tripping over a rock and falling to the ground. He began to beg for his life. But Nozaki coldly told him that he was the one who had wanted this massacre to happen. Suddenly, the man threatened to curse Nozaki and drag him down to hell with him. Nozaki simply replied gently, apologizing that he was an atheist. He also blamed himself for not letting Philip and his men carry out their plans sooner. Nozaki said he had nothing more to say, and stepped towards the man, as he began to scream in terror. And that was the end of him. After the battle was over, Nozaki stood tall with pride, telling himself that they were the ones who had started it all, from stealing materials from his hobgoblins to harming the girl. When he remembered the girl, Nozaki was startled, thinking he had forgotten to untie her. But before he could do anything, she ran out of the building, calling his name. Nozaki wondered how she had escaped her bonds, and she explained that another one of her patients had found and helped her. He realized she had witnessed everything he'd done and was about to explain, but she already knew everything after hearing what the village chief had said. She brushed aside everything that had happened, holding no blame against him. The girl told Nozaki it was time for them to leave the village as soon as possible, and she decided she would go with him. She knew that after what had just happened, it was best to leave, as her powers were no longer needed, regardless of whether the village fell into ruin or was revived. Nozaki realized the girl was now his ally while he remained an object of fear, leaving her with no home to return to. Understanding this, Nozaki asked her before they left what she wanted to bring, since he could help carry it. When the girl finished packing, Nozaki saw she had brought quite a lot, with a large backpack sitting on the ground. He broke into a sweat when he saw it and told her it was time to get going. She looked back at the village one last time, then smiled at him, agreeing to leave. Nozaki knew that the expression on the girl's face at that moment was something he would never forget. They continued on their journey, estimating it would take a few more hours to get out of the forest. The girl explained that just outside the forest there was a main road with many inns scattered along it. During the journey, Nozaki began to talk about how he had gotten here, telling her only that he had lost his memory when he arrived in the forest. They kept talking, gradually getting to know each other better. However, Nozaki started to realize that his head was beginning to feel strange. Nozaki felt like he was genuinely enjoying himself traveling with the girl. They were still talking, but he was distracted by how comfortable he felt. Talking to her, the girl felt like someone he had known for a very long time. 3 days passed and they had set up camp somewhere. Nozaki sat by the fire and realized that skipping the inn had been a mistake, and now they were stuck camping. When no one was looking, he thought it was a good time to check his status. The girl had once told him that masters in this world use the church's magical devices to check their levels, so the fact that he could check it himself was unusual. When the status box appeared, Nozaki saw that he had reached level 15 and had gained 2 new skills: perception and stealth. He also noticed his title was Goblin and began to wonder who was managing this status system, and whether the god who sent him to this world had anything to do with it. The other title he had was Monster. Nozaki realized that after killing those people earlier, he had received the Monster title. This was the first night he couldn't sleep after killing someone. He figured it made sense, considering the experience he gained came from killing humans. He wondered if a war broke out the next day, whether it would be easy to reach level 100. When the girl asked about the war that Nozaki was thinking about, she explained that it was unlikely to happen. Nozaki guessed that there was probably some system preventing it. He then asked what happens when members of the same species kill each other. The girl walked ahead before realizing that Nozaki had stopped, his head bowed low. She asked him if something was wrong, while Nozaki's fist trembled. As he recalled her words, when the same species kill each other, the experience gained is almost negligible. But when he killed humans, his level had risen significantly. He began to wonder what he really was, as the title Monster flashed in his mind. The girl asked if he needed some medicine, seeing him staring at the sky with a serious expression. Eventually, the two of them found a place to stop and rest. Nozaki lay in bed, still thinking about what the girl had told him. He knew he was different from humans because he had gained experience from killing them. He realized he couldn't let this truth be known, or he would be eliminated immediately for being considered a threat. Suddenly, someone entered the room, catching his attention. It was the girl who had just come out of the bathroom, asking what he was doing here. She told him to leave, thinking she had told him to go to the dining hall, then threw a towel at his face. Nozaki tried to explain himself by saying he was just thinking about a few things. In the end, they both went to eat. They toasted with a glass of wine, celebrating the safe journey they just had. They started to eat and enjoy the delicious meal. Nozaki felt relieved knowing that the journey would end the next day. He knew that if he continued to stay with the girl, he would gradually develop feelings for her, and might bring her misfortune or even fall in love with her. After the party, they continued their journey and finally arrived. The girl pointed and called Nozaki's attention, saying she could see the city. The city was named Rock Cliff. It appeared before their eyes, leaving them both stunned and amazed to have finally reached their destination. They approached the line of people waiting to enter the city, and Nozaki pulled up his hood to hide himself, just in case of any trouble. The closer they got to the city, the more impressed they were by its scale and beauty. When the guard called for the next group to be checked, Nozaki and the girl knew it was their turn. The girl stepped forward and tried to take something out of her bag, unsure if it could be used as a pass to enter the city. Nozaki started to worry, wondering if he had been put on a wanted list after the incident in the village. Finally, the girl pulled out a letter from her senior apprentice. The guards recognized that she was an acquaintance of someone named Claren and immediately allowed them to enter, even waving goodbye as they walked into the city. Nozaki was completely surprised they could get in so easily and wondered who Claren was. The girl explained that Claren was the adopted daughter of the local lord, Earl Megan. Nozaki was shocked by this information, but let the girl lead the way. They walked through the city, and Nozaki looked around in amazement at the unfamiliar yet impressive scenery. He had expected this, since it was a city that thrived on trade, but he was still captivated by its vibrancy. He felt relieved to see many different races, which helped him not stand out too much in the crowd. Suddenly, the girl called for Nozaki to hurry and catch up, making him realize he had been engrossed in the sights. Finally, they arrived at an old house where a woman was coming out. An elderly person stood outside, waving goodbye and telling her to take care. When the woman turned around, she saw the girl waving at her, surprised by her presence. The girl, whose name was Belle, ran to the woman with eyes full of excitement. This woman was the one Belle had been talking about. Claren and Belle hugged each other tightly, greeting one another after being apart for so long. Claren looked up with a more serious expression and asked the two of them what had happened, her gaze then shifting towards Nozaki. After Nozaki introduced himself and recounted everything, Claren understood the situation and thanked Nozaki for doing a good job bringing Belle to her. Claren led Belle inside the house, wanting her to get some rest. Belle stopped, saying that Nozaki still needed to go with them, and continued to call him Goblin. She turned back and noticed Nozaki wasn't moving, which was when he said that this was the end of his journey. Claren knew exactly who Nozaki was, and what he had done, so she warned him to be careful because he had killed someone of noble blood. Nozaki thanked her and started to turn away. Belle kept calling out to him, but Claren interrupted her, saying that Nozaki was thinking of her future. Nozaki told Belle to take care of herself and turned his back completely, not wanting to look back. Belle was silent for a moment, then suddenly broke into a smile and told Nozaki to take care of himself. And now Nozaki was alone again. He sat by the fountain trying to sort out his thoughts, before suddenly standing up and slapping himself in the face. This isn't the time to be sad, it's time to get on with surviving. He approached a stranger and asked for directions, then started walking in that direction, knowing he needed to earn some money while he was here. Nozaki knew he needed to become an adventurer while he was in the city. Eventually, he found the Adventurers Guild. Standing before the large wooden doors, he took a deep breath and stepped inside, beginning the second chapter of his life. He thought about what to expect inside the guild and the new kind of life he was about to pursue. Nozaki started recalling all the RPGs he'd ever played, imagining he might meet a tavern hostess or a receptionist who would bestow a blessing. But reality wasn't what he'd imagined. Before him was an old man. The man asked if Nozaki was there to register, and when Nozaki nodded, he pointed to a piece of paper for him to sign. Nozaki struggled with signing his name, but the old man told him anything that looked like a signature would do, since many in the guild couldn't write. What mattered was a person's ability to work. The old man also advised Nozaki not to pay attention to the chatter from the other guild members. As Nozaki looked around, he noticed many people had formed groups in the bar, as all the patrons were adventurers. Many eyes had been on Nozaki from the moment he walked in. A group at a table started talking about how dangerous Nozaki looked. One of the men asked Kaimon, another in the group, if he agreed, and Kaimon nodded. Another man at the table said he didn't like the situation, stood up, and drew his weapon, not liking the way Nozaki was looking at them. The man with the ponytail told the guy with the weapon to leave Nozaki alone, but that didn't seem to stop him, as he started advancing on Nozaki. It seemed Nozaki could never get a moment of peace. The large man with the weapon walked up to Nozaki, angrily asking what he was looking at. Nozaki started to tremble, but held his ground even as the tall man loomed over him. The big guy called him a nuisance, while the old man at the bar told them that if they were going to fight, they should take it outside. Nozaki realized that staring at the group had been too direct, and causing trouble on his very first day wouldn't be a good idea. This man was strong, but Nozaki had no other choice and prepared himself for a new kind of battle. This time not with his fists, but with his wits. He scratched his neck and apologized, saying he found the man so impressive that he couldn't help but stare. The man fell silent, starting to look like he believed Nozaki's words. To make the lie more convincing, Nozaki changed both his tone and his entire demeanor. The others at the table watched, one of them smirking. After Nozaki finished his flattery, he waited to see if the plan would work. No one had ever managed to get out of this situation before. But Nozaki began to worry when the man tightened his grip on his weapon and said that Nozaki talked too much, making Nozaki believe his words might not work on a seasoned adventurer. However, luckily, Nozaki discovered that his words were actually working. The big man looked bashful. Nozaki chuckled to himself at how easy it was to deceive this man. He continued the charade by offering the man a drink. After 2 hours, only the group at the table and Nozaki were left in the bar. The man was completely drunk, laughing with the few women he had just met. As everyone was chatting, the man with the ponytail turned to greet Nozaki and introduced himself as Al. Nozaki smiled back, but he knew Al was a sharp one, so he needed to be careful. Al confirmed that Nozaki's name was Yajin, saying it was a name he wasn't familiar with. Nozaki explained his name and appearance by saying his grandmother had been sold into slavery and came to Rockcliffe from a faraway place. A young boy sitting nearby chimed into the conversation, saying his sister had also been sold into slavery. Al introduced the boy as Kimon and said not to mind his quiet nature. Nozaki replied that it was a pleasure to meet Kimon, and Al began to wonder what the group would do next, as the large man named Gons had disappeared with the women he'd met. Nozaki asked Al about the surrounding area, saying that his mother lived in a rural village and had never been out much, so he didn't know much about the world. That was also a lie, but Al still pulled out a map of the area, pointing out the location of Rockcliffe and the neighboring regions. Nozaki felt a thrill of excitement at the new information he was learning. To the north was the Holy Land of the Forest, led by a self-proclaimed group. To the west was the Aslart Kingdom, to the east was the Kreiser Kingdom, and to the south was the Mariano Kingdom. He noted that the closest border was to the west, and made a mental note of it. Nozaki pointed to another spot on the map and asked about it. Al explained it was the Megid Empire, an incredibly vast nation and a good place to live if you were an ordinary citizen. As the night wore on, the two men continued to talk and laugh with each other, while Kimon seemed to have dozed off. When he realized it was time to leave, Nozaki walked up the bar's staircase, saying goodbye to the others. Al thanked Nozaki for a fun evening. Nozaki entered one of the rooms where he would be sleeping for the night, and sat on the bed, checking the money left in his pouch. There wasn't much, and he knew he couldn't buy any decent armor with this amount, so he needed to find a way to make more money quickly. The money left in his pouch was from Belle, who had given it to him before they parted ways. He had initially refused, planning to sell what he hunted and gathered along the way, and if any problems arose, he would just camp outdoors. Belle wasn't happy with that, saying he should at least have enough money to live on. She also told him he was just borrowing the money, and had to pay it back double when he returned. Nozaki buried his face between his knees, sadly recalling the memories of her. The moment was nearly ruined by the sounds of Gons and the women in the next room. The next day, Nozaki was ready. He splashed water on his face from a nearby well and returned to the inn with a plan. He intended to join the group of people he had spoken with the night before, feeling that he had made a good impression on them. He approached the group and said he wanted to join their party, declaring that he wanted to become an adventurer like Gons. However, Gons misunderstood Nozaki and thought he was planning to mooch off their group, leaving Nozaki utterly bewildered. Al quickly intervened and told Gons to calm down, explaining that Nozaki, who went by Yajin, was from a rural area. Al asked Nozaki if he knew about base value, and Nozaki admitted that he didn't. Al explained that a person's stats were represented by strength, stamina, intelligence, willpower, and dexterity. Among those, strength and stamina were the most important for an adventurer. The base value is the initial level everyone has when they start. A person's stats are determined by their base value and their level. If your base value is lower than what's required for a job, then you wouldn't be the best choice. Nozaki asked how one determines their base value, and Al explained that strength and stamina are determined by one's physical build from birth. Al also asked Nozaki if he'd noticed that everyone in the inn, except for Kimon, was taller than him. Gons chimed in, adding that their party couldn't break through a certain level cap, so they were still stuck at level 6, despite being the strongest team in Rockcliffe. They explained that if Nozaki didn't have a special talent like Kimon, he would never have a place on their team. Nozaki, still unwilling to give up, asked what a special talent was. Al explained that it referred to the skills a person has, and gave an example saying they were looking for someone who specialized in scouting with the presence detection skill, since it was a hard one to come by. Nozaki was silent for a moment, making the others think he was spacing out, until he finally spoke up with a hopeful look in his eyes, saying that he had skills from the scouting branch. The whole group was shocked by this information and started discussing it. In the end, they said they couldn't just take Nozaki's word for it without any proof. Gons interjected, saying that Nozaki would have to demonstrate his skills during a training session. So, Nozaki got ready for his demonstration, while the others in the group took turns showing off their skills. It was a sight he almost wanted to cover his eyes for. Kimon used his appraisal skill to pick out a good set of armor, then Gons used his natural intimidation to scare the shopkeeper. Al, on the other hand, just smiled while haggling, as if they weren't doing anything wrong. In the end, the shopkeeper reluctantly sold the armor to the group. Nozaki ended up with an incredibly good set of armor for a surprisingly cheap price. He paused for a moment and apologized to the group, thanking them for giving him the chance to take the test to join the team, and for even helping him buy gear. Nozaki was confident he would pass the test, so he didn't want everyone to feel like their efforts were for nothing. Gon slapped Nozaki hard on the back and told him not to worry, because if he failed, they would just take the armor back from his corpse and sell it to get their money back. The group left after joking with Nozaki, reminding him of the harsh nature of this world. The test would be tomorrow, and Gon's told Nozaki to get a good night's sleep. The next day, the group prepared to set out on a quest, which would serve as the test to prove whether or not Nozaki would actually be useful to the party. Everyone was ready, but Nozaki hadn't been able to sleep. They began their long journey, while Al looked over the quest sheet. It was a request to exterminate a wolf-type monster called a gray wolf, because it had been attacking livestock. The quest would only take about a day, and the commission fee, in Al's opinion, wasn't bad either. Nozaki realized that the walking pace in this world was different from his previous one, and the most important factor right now was stamina. But he wondered why this particular quest had been left on the notice board. People usually get rewards for completing requests posted on the board, but because Gon's had overslept, this was the last quest left when they arrived. Al explained that gray wolves usually hunt in packs of 5, like groups of 5 or 10. If someone's actual strength wasn't enough, the tables could quickly be turned, which is why people usually avoided this quest. After walking a bit further, they finally arrived at the village. As soon as they entered, they witnessed a horrific sight before them. Sheep lay scattered on the ground, their bodies torn apart by the brutal pack of wolves. The villagers said this wasn't the first time their livestock had been attacked, and that today was the 3rd time it had happened. Nozaki felt pity for the villagers, as they were constantly being worn down by the terrible situation. A little girl named Mia approached her grandfather, who was explaining the situation, and said she wanted to make a proper grave for the sheep. It seemed the little girl had a close bond with the sheep that were killed, and she continued to mourn their deaths. If this continued, the village would be ruined. The grandfather begged the adventurers to help them in any way they could. Al replied that they needed more details before they could offer their assistance. The old man led Al somewhere to explain the situation more clearly, and Al told the others to wait here while he went to find out more. Gon didn't say anything else because he had complete faith in Al's negotiation skills. If something wasn't right, they would just refuse the quest and leave. While they waited, Nozaki and Gon stood guard, staying vigilant for anything unusual. Gon's noticed Nozaki wondering why they had to be so on guard when the surrounding townspeople seemed so friendly. But before Gon's could explain further, Al returned from speaking with the old man and approached them. Gon's asked how things went, and Al replied that they would proceed with the mission. The monsters were in the eastern part of the forest, and the group prepared to head in that direction. Al went on to explain to Nozaki that he should remember that a client might lie to make a quest seem easier or promise a higher reward. In that case, the responsibility would fall on them, and no one else. Nozaki realized that in this harsh world, he had to take responsibility for his own life. When the group reached the forest, they readied themselves for a potential battle. Gon said that they would wait outside the forest, while Nozaki would go in first to find the gray wolf's lair, and then come back to report. Al warned Nozaki to always use his concealment skill, because if he was spotted before finding them, he'd be in big trouble. Before Nozaki left, Kimon called out to him and told him to show them what he was made of, which made Al chuckle at the encouragement. Nozaki also understood that if he succeeded, he would help Kimon get a break from this mission. Nozaki stepped into the forest, and it had been a long time since he'd been back in a place with so many trees. Not since he lived in the woods for the first 3 months after arriving in this world. Although he was once very familiar with the forest, this time he felt a sense of displacement, as if everything had changed in a way he couldn't explain. Nozaki remembered that the gray wolves would be much larger than the wolves from his previous world, and they surely had a keen sense of smell. He snapped out of his thoughts, shaking his head and telling himself that this forest was not his home. His priority right now was to eliminate his body odor. He looked around for plants that could help mask his scent, and spotted a mint bush growing nearby. Nozaki began rubbing the mint leaves all over his body, successfully masking his scent. He thought that when he returned, he would tell Gon's and the others to do the same. Standing still, Nozaki focused on heightening his senses and using his perception skill at maximum capacity. He tuned out everything around him and tried to find a clue leading to the gray wolf's lair. Although he could vaguely sense the presence of animals around him, finding a specific monster with just this skill was difficult. He recalled the information Al had provided about the wolves moving in packs. Taking advantage of this, Nozaki began to observe and discovered large tracks on the ground, not just from one animal, but from many. He used his perception skill once more and was startled to detect 5 presences nearby. Following the path that led to those 5 presences, Nozaki finally approached the wolves' lair, seeing the ferocious beast from a distance. He then quickly returned and informed the others, leading them to the spot he had found. The group felt proud of Nozaki's skills. They asked Al for the next plan, and Al asked Nozaki if he was sure the wolves were the only enemies, which Nozaki confirmed. Al cracked a smile and said it was time for them to go wild and show Nozaki the team's true strength, since they didn't want a newcomer looking down on them. Al told Nozaki to watch from a distance and witness them fight the wolves. The group entered the cave quietly, and they had already planned ahead with Nozaki. When the wolves detected them, Nozaki would give the signal to start the battle. Nozaki watched carefully and immediately noticed one of the wolves begin to move. He jumped up and signaled to the group that they had been spotted, calling Kaimon into action. Kimon drew his bow and shot a wolf right in the eye as it was running out. Right after that, Gons rushed toward the wolf, readying his axe and letting out a battle cry before striking the beast. As Gons pulled his axe back, he heard the barks of 2 other wolves rushing out from the cave. They charged straight at him, but Gons didn't even flinch, instantly splitting another wolf in 2 with a single powerful swing of his axe. Nozaki was amazed by Gons' skill, having taken down 2 wolves so quickly. However, the only problem was that Gons' movements were too wide, leaving him open for another wolf to nearly bite him. But before that could happen, Al rushed in and blocked the attack with his shield, sending the wolf flying. Nozaki realized the strategy the group was using. Gons made wide, powerful attacks while Al covered his openings and protected him from surprise attacks. They were surrounded by 3 more wolves, but it was no trouble for the team, as Keeman and Al precisely hindered the enemy's movements. The last wolf staggered, arrows stuck in its limbs, while Gon stood over it, ready to deliver the final blow. He brought his axe down and the wolf's head was severed. Ending the battle with a victory for the group, Nozaki watched in awe, as Rockcliffe's strongest party demonstrated their power. The corpses of the ferocious wolves lay scattered on the ground, and the group stood proudly after the battle. Nozaki broke out in a sweat, feeling their terrifying power as they took down 5 wolves in the blink of an eye. Nozaki just stood there, stunned, until Gons walked over and asked him what he was staring at, reminding him that his job wasn't over and that he needed to work hard like a rookie. Everyone had to pull their weight by carrying back a wolf's carcass. They moved the gray wolves' carcasses to a nearby river to butcher them and gather materials. Nozaki helped Kimon with the dismantling process, learning more from him. By the time they returned to the village, the sky had grown dark. While the villagers celebrated the adventurer's success, they advised the group to stay the night to ensure maximum safety. Nozaki wondered if the others had noticed how tired he was, but he quickly pushed the thought aside and went back to talking with the villagers. One of them asked if Nozaki was the one who found the wolf pack's den by himself, but Nozaki humbly said that he hadn't done much. The little girl Mia from before quickly ran up to Nozaki, giving him a thankful smile and calling him Mr. Her grandfather immediately corrected her for calling him that, while Nozaki just chuckled softly. With that, Nozaki had finally and safely made it through his first battle as an adventurer, opening up many opportunities for new journeys in the future. The next day, Nozaki eagerly awaited his reward after he and the party completed the quest. The group handed him a pouch of money, and Nozaki thanked them loudly, wondering if the amount they gave him was really correct. The group believed it was enough for Nozaki to live comfortably for a week before he'd need to find another job. Gons reassured Nozaki that he deserved the money for his contributions in the fight against the Grey Wolf Pack. Al and the others said their goodbyes to Nozaki, leaving him free to do whatever he wanted for the rest of the day. As the 3 of them quickly disappeared into the city on their own business, Nozaki stood still, thinking about his next move. He recalled how the other members fought during the mission, understanding that risking one's life was part of an adventurer's job. But the immense mental pressure he felt was anything but normal, even when he was just watching the battle from the sidelines. Nozaki planned to think about his future and find the same mental peace that Al and the others had, but his train of thought was cut short by his growling stomach. That became his top priority. Nozaki returned to the restaurant and ordered a whole roasted chicken with vegetables just for himself. The waitress apologized for the delay, and Nozaki immediately began his meal, thanking her. and taking a bite. He realized this dish was far more delicious than anything he had ever eaten in this world. The waitress asked for his opinion, explaining that the ingredients for this dish were very expensive. Nozaki surprisingly declared that he would spend all his money on food, because for an adventurer, the body is the most valuable asset. The waitress laughed at his words, noting that Nozaki was one of the few who didn't just turn to alcohol and women for comfort. However, she warned Nozaki that this path would be difficult, as stockpiling meat and vegetables was dangerous due to monsters hunting them, or high taxes on gathering vegetables. She suggested that Nozaki would have to earn money properly if he wanted to continue enjoying delicious meals, and that was exactly what he decided to do. Nozaki continued to take on quests from the Adventurers Guild with the help of Al and the others. During one quest, he volunteered to be the bait to lure an ostrich-like creature into a surrounded area. When the creature was in range, Al signaled to Kimon, and the boy released his prepared arrow, hitting the monster in the eye and stunning it. Nozaki ran past Gons, creating an opening for Gons to swing his axe and chop off the bird's head. The group praised Nozaki, who was still using the name Yajin, for doing a great job as bait. Nozaki completed many quests with the group and their teamwork grew stronger. After some time, they returned and held a celebratory feast after completing a mission. Nozaki was very excited about the meal, but Al reminded him to calm down, as this wasn't a nobleman's feast, and asked if Nozaki was spending all his money on food. Nozaki explained that for an adventurer, health is the most important thing. The group thought he was strange, but they finished their meal together. Nozaki and Gon started a friendly argument about counting something. Nozaki believed the number was 15, but Gons could only count to 10, which confused Nozaki. Gons explained it was because he only had 10 fingers. Nozaki laughed and said that Gons could count to 20 if he used his toes as well. However, Nozaki immediately regretted his joke when he saw the grim look on Gons' face. However, it was just a false alarm as Gons lifted his foot to observe it. Before giving Nozaki a thumbs up as a compliment for the advice, the day ended and Nozaki walked down the hallway, feeling full from the feast, until he looked out a window and noticed the view from it. He had thought he was getting used to life in Rockcliffe, until one day they received a new request. This time, it involved gray wolves again. Al said it was the exact same request as last time, to eliminate 5 gray wolves. But they were worried that this time might be different, even if things seemed easy before. When the group arrived at the village, they were greeted by an old man, who began to explain the situation from the beginning. Nozaki wasn't too worried, as everything seemed to be going just like last time. When they reached the forest and waited for Nozaki to find the den, he emerged, and reported that he had found the wolves' lair, but this time they needed to lure them out to have a better chance in the fight, due to the thick grass in front of the den. Al seemed hesitant about this plan, thinking it was too dangerous, but Nozaki was insistent, saying his job as a scout was to be the lure and asking the group to trust him. After some thought, Al agreed to the plan, but warned Nozaki that he was not to die under any circumstances. Nozaki found a small animal and killed it, using its blood as bait to lure the wolves out of their den. A growl rang out, and a wolf shot out from the darkness, rushing toward Nozaki. He smiled, knowing the chase was about to begin. All 5 gray wolves charged after Nozaki, as he ran towards the escape route he had found earlier. Al and the others were waiting outside the forest, weapons at the ready. A bird flew down and landed on a rock next to Kimon, then flew away in a fluster, just as Al began to think that Nozaki was late. But at that very moment, Nozaki burst out of the forest and shouted for everyone to get ready to attack. The 3 men smiled before readying themselves for battle, as the pack of wolves began to pour out from the woods. The group had no trouble at all dealing with the wolves, quickly taking down all 5 of them. However, the situation didn't stay that way for long. Nozaki suddenly sensed many other entities approaching from a distance. His eyes widened in confusion and fear as he tried to warn the others that enemy reinforcements were on their way. When asked how many, Nozaki said that 10 wolves were coming, stunning Al and Gons. While the extra wolves would be tough, what concerned Nozaki more was the creature in the middle, which had a completely different presence from the gray wolves. Nozaki began to wonder what he was going to do about this situation, realizing that fighting that creature was nearly impossible. Gons asked Al if they should retreat, but Al said they couldn't leave without finishing off the 5 wolves they were already fighting. Nozaki stood there thinking about the battle, and for a moment, he considered saving his own skin by abandoning the others. He was about to run for it, but then he stopped, his mind changing in an instant. Nozaki felt that this whole situation was his fault as a scout, and that responsibility forced him to do something, so he wouldn't have to live with the regret of abandoning his comrades. He rushed forward saying he would back up the group, ready to launch a kick at the wolf. Even though he had never fought a four-legged monster before, he believed the kick would be effective, just as it had been with other monsters in the past. However, the wolf quickly dodged, reacting with impressive speed and darting behind Nozaki, preparing to attack him from his blind spot. Nozaki knew that if the attack landed, it would be bad, so he quickly leapt to the side, rolling on the grass before getting back to his feet. Al shouted a warning about how dangerous it was. But Nozaki was too focused on finding an opening to attack the wolf head-on. He watched the wolf's movements as it stood still before it started to charge again. Nozaki used its own speed against it and successfully counterattacked, killing the monster with a single kick, sending it flying and convulsing on the ground. He felt more confident in his fighting ability, realizing that while the wolves were fast, they lacked stamina. Nozaki turned back, noticing 2 more wolves. But he was too late. Al and Gons had already taken down the last 2 wolves of the group of 5. Al asked Nozaki if he was done with the wolf he was fighting, as they prepared to retreat. However, Nozaki looked behind him and saw that 10 more wolves were now standing before them. The group stood in silence, facing the new pack, until Al noticed a wolf in the middle of them. Al began to explain that it was rare for a black wolf to appear in a pack of gray wolves, as it was a superior version. The black wolf took a deep breath and raised its head, letting out a loud howl. Nozaki pulled the small knife from his back, ready for the impending battle. All the gray wolves charged toward the group at once. Gon smirked, raised his axe high, and shouted that there was no escape. They would have to fight with all their might. Nozaki raised his fists, knife in one hand, and silently observed the situation. He noticed that the black wolf wasn't joining the attack. Instead, it seemed to be watching from a distance. Each member of the group had to face their own wolves. 2 wolves advanced on Nozaki, growling before lunging at him. He dodged them, but the wolves attacked relentlessly, not giving him a moment's rest. Another wolf immediately charged after the first, making it impossible for Nozaki to dodge. Its fangs tore a gash in his leg as it ran past, and just then he realized a 3rd wolf was charging in for another attack. The 3 wolves began to circle Nozaki, keeping their distance as he realized they were just toying with him, maintaining their distance after each strike to apply pressure. Nozaki noticed the movements of these wolves were completely different from the gray wolves he had encountered before. He wondered if it was because of the black wolf watching from afar. Even as Nozaki tried to defend himself, he knew that the blood loss would be a major handicap if the fight dragged on. Nozaki felt a sense of despair, realizing that dying to these wolves was a real possibility after all the pain and suffering he'd been through, including being brought to this world. He decided that he had to survive, that he had to kill these wolves. A wolf lunged at him and Nozaki knew he had to risk taking a hit to get a chance for a solid counterattack. He charged toward the wolf, slashing its neck with his knife, successfully killing it, though his face was scratched in the process. Just then another wolf lunged, sinking its teeth deep into Nozaki's leg, stopping him in his tracks as he struggled with the pain. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he raised his knife and plunged it into the head of the wolf, biting him, ending its life. Meanwhile, the last wolf leaped straight at Nozaki's face. He had to slam his hand against its head, its teeth and claws tearing at his hand and forehead. His knife fell to the ground, and blood began to drip from his face, blurring the vision in one of his eyes, but he remained standing. Nozaki knew he could manage without his knife, but the state of his wounds was becoming a problem. He thought for a moment, trying to figure out an attack that would kill the wolf in a single blow, until he remembered something he had hidden in his clothes for a situation just like this: a silver coin and some spices. He quickly pulled the coin from his shirt and threw it at the wolf's face, stunning it. This gave Nozaki the opening to land a punch on the wolf's face, knocking it out. Nozaki felt a sense of accomplishment, but a sudden chill ran down his spine when he remembered the black wolf. He turned around, but it was too late. The black wolf had already leaped and tackled Nozaki to the ground, sending him crashing hard onto the earth. Al watched Nozaki's predicament with worry as the black wolf drooled over his face. It had pinned Nozaki down completely, its claws starting to dig into his chest, piercing through his metal armor. Nozaki knew his strength was nearly gone and he was about to lose his grip. In that brief moment, Nozaki remembered something he could do. He let go of the beast, and as the black wolf tried to bite him, he twisted his body to dodge the attack, then quickly pulled out the packet of spices and shoved it right in the wolf's face. The monster, stunned, reared its head up, and Nozaki seized the opportunity. He grabbed the wolf, climbed onto its back, and locked its head in his arms, trying to choke it out. The black wolf started to stand on its hind legs, trying to throw Nozaki off its back, but to no avail. It thrashed and bucked, hoping Nozaki would let go. But Nozaki knew he couldn't let go, as his very life depended on holding on. After a long struggle and violent movements, the black wolf's body began to tremble, tears and drool dripping from its face. Nozaki held on firmly, not letting go even for a second, until he was sure the wolf had no strength left. The wolf's eyes began to roll back into its head, and finally the giant beast collapsed onto the grass. Nozaki kept his grip on the wolf, even after it had fallen, to make sure it was truly dead. After waiting a moment, he slowly let go, and looked at what he had done. The black wolf was finally dead, and Nozaki lay on the grass looking up at the sky with a sense of happiness and satisfaction. The battle was over, but Nozaki had no strength left to move. It seemed he had used up all his energy in the fight and couldn't even stand up. The others in the group had also successfully defeated the Grey Wolves, and Gons walked over to Nozaki, looking at him with an unreadable expression. Nozaki braced himself to be scolded for not paying attention to his surroundings and letting the ambush happen without warning. But luckily, that wasn't what Gons was worried about. Gons praised Nozaki for taking down the Black Wolf by himself, while Al walked over, his hair disheveled and bloody, also praising Nozaki's skills. When the battle was over and Nozaki had gathered enough energy to stand, the group of men stood around the Black Wolf's corpse. Keeman began to carve up the corpse, checking to see if there were any special items inside. Keeman's eyes widened as he announced he'd found the very thing the group had hoped to find inside the monster's body. A magic stone. Nozaki was confused about the item, until Al explained that it was used as fuel for magical devices or as a catalyst in alchemy. These magic stones usually form inside the bodies of monsters like the Black Wolf Nozaki had defeated. Magic stones, like the one found in the Black Wolf's body, could also be found in dungeons with high concentrations of mana. However, a stone of the size they had harvested was still a rarity. Al went on to explain that since it was a consumable item, it could be sold for a high price, which caught Nozaki's attention and made him smile happily at the thought of earning money for more delicious food. Al added that they would have much to discuss after they finished butchering the monster. The group returned to the village, and when the villagers saw them, surprise and astonishment were written all over their faces as they realized what Al and Gons were carrying. Al greeted the old man who had given them the quest and asked if he recognized the pelt on the stick they were holding. The old man erupted in surprise upon learning that the group had defeated the Black Wolf. Gons told the old man that he and the others had nearly died because of him. Suddenly, Gons drew his axe and swung it violently toward the client, rage boiling inside him. Nozaki believed this scene reflected an adventurer's ability to recognize that a client had lied to them, and Al and Nozaki had to hold Gons back before he could bring the axe down on the old man's head. The village chief bowed his head and admitted everything through tears, knowing there was a chance of more wolves but had kept quiet to lower the commission fee, hoping that the group would accept the quest. Al was frustrated at being deceived, saying the man probably possessed a forked tongue skill, but Nozaki couldn't tell if Al was being serious or just joking. Afterward, Al began to relentlessly demand compensation for what the group had been through. When they finished their business, the knights arrived and they set up camp along the road back to Rockcliffe. Everyone was tired, but the atmosphere was cheerful thanks to the large sum of money everyone received. The main party members started chatting with each other, telling different stories from previous quests about their families, friends, and everything else. Nozaki truly felt like he had become a member of the group after fighting alongside them. The days passed and the party finally returned to the city. Nozaki saw the steep parts of Rockcliffe and wondered why he felt so fond of this place, even though it looked like a den of criminals. Since when had he started to think of this place as his home? But there was another discovery, or more accurately, a lack of one. Nozaki checked his status and noticed that his level hadn't gone up, making him start to think that he needed something else to level up. However, he noticed he had new titles, only to realize that it was yet another insulting one, probably thanks to the god he had met before. Nozaki touched his head, feeling angry that the god was making light of his suffering. All of his journeys, from being thrown into a dangerous forest, to having to fight monsters and even people, to getting used to a normal life in the city, had been anything but easy. In the end, Nozaki decided he would show that god what he thought about it having fun at his expense, and he wanted to prove that he could find happiness in his new life. Several days passed since Nozaki and the others completed their previous guild quest. Gons and the others seemed to have no concept of saving, as no one wanted to move on to the next job without spending all the money they had earned. Nozaki lay in bed, waking up from an afternoon nap, feeling like he had a lot of free time on his hands. For the first time since coming to this world, there was only one thing he could do: gather information. After lunch, Nozaki would chat with the guild receptionist and gather whatever knowledge and stories she had. It was a daily habit, but it helped him kill time. Nozaki had realized that the old man was actually quite amazing, having once been a famous adventurer thanks to the diverse information he provided. Through those stories, Nozaki discovered that every few levels, there was a barrier preventing players from leveling up. Specifically, players needed to defeat monsters of a higher rank. At level 5, a player had to fight a rank 2 monster. At level 10, a rank 3 monster. And at level 15, a rank 4 monster. Monsters that Nozaki had never faced before. The guild receptionist understood Nozaki's thoughts on why Gons and the others couldn't break past the level cap, and the reason was that rank 4 monsters were extremely powerful. The metal weapons the group was using couldn't even scratch their skin. The old man explained that weapons made from an ore called black steel could defeat rank 4 monsters, but they were very expensive and couldn't be bought with the money Nozaki and the others had. Even if they managed to pool their money to buy one weapon, they would still have to protect it with their lives, because if they lost a battle, everything they owned would disappear upon death. The receptionist didn't believe it was worth the risk to reach a higher level and suggested Nozaki should stay at level 15, as it was enough to complete some requests. Stagnating at level 15 seemed to be what everyone, including the guild receptionist, wanted to do. Nozaki ended that day by lying in bed, thinking about this world's level barrier. He yawned and wondered what he would do about the current situation and if he wanted to become stronger. Nozaki raised his fist but immediately felt a wave of discomfort wash over him, which confused him. He stood up and started throwing a few punches into the air. Realizing that his body felt heavier, Nozaki decided to talk to Al about this. Al understood what Nozaki was going through and explained that physical abilities increase when using combat skills. He used a sword as an example of something this effect would also apply to. This happens because when a person intends to attack, the skill activates the moment they hold the weapon. When one's physical abilities return to normal, it's natural to feel that their movements have become sluggish. Al asked Nozaki if this reminded him of anything, but Nozaki admitted that his skill wasn't something he had learned today or yesterday, which left both of them confused. Nozaki knew that if what Al said was true, he would have noticed the fluctuation immediately. He began to think that maybe he had been mistaken about his karate skill having no effect, meaning he was only just now feeling it for the first time, even though he had possessed it for a very long time. Nozaki's fist tightened as Al asked him if something was wrong, but he didn't answer, still lost in thought. A sword skill activates when holding a weapon. So how could a karate skill be activated? That's when Nozaki realized the problem was his breathing. His breathing was different from a normal person's, as he used an abdominal breathing technique to control it optimally, aiming to produce as little sound as possible. He had been applying this technique for years. In fact, it wasn't just his breathing, his gaze, his walk, and his center of gravity. All the karate techniques he had learned were deeply ingrained in his body. This meant his skill had been continuously activated that entire time, every single day. When he finally lay down on the bed and let his guard down, his breathing became irregular and the skill was deactivated. That was the first time Nozaki had realized it all. While Al looked at him with a puzzled expression, Nozaki suddenly got Al's attention and asked him to teach him everything Al knew about skills. Once Al agreed, Nozaki went far outside the city, near the city walls, with the sun shining high above. He walked as far as he could, holding a lantern in his left hand while looking around to check if anyone was nearby. He placed the lantern on the ground, recalling everything Al had taught him. Al explained that the ultimate effect of a skill is the optimization of movement. This means that when the concept is fully mastered, it can help a person execute the best attacks regardless of the circumstances. Nozaki was very impressed with the information Al had shared and wanted to test it out immediately. He prepared for the training session, beginning to visualize the movements in his head. Nozaki's eyes widened as he realized his body was beginning to move in response to the skill. Not wanting to resist the effect, he immediately threw a punch into the air with a fluid and precise motion. Nozaki stood in place, his fist still extended, feeling amazing about the move he had just performed. His center of gravity lowered as his knees relaxed, and the energy stored in his knees was transferred to his fist. As he pushed out the energy, he added a slight twist to his fist. Nozaki knew that none of this would have been possible without the help of the skill. The complex physical movements showed him the world that a master lives in. Night fell quickly, but the candle from the lantern Nozaki carried continued to shine, lighting his way as he practiced his karate techniques. using the new movement optimization. After a long time, Nozaki began to realize that he was having a lot of fun during his training. He started to reminisce about the first time he learned karate as a child. He thanked the world and the god who created the karate skills he had learned, and knew that those skills would not be abandoned in this new world. From now on, Nozaki would live with strength. The man practiced all night, not once going inside to sleep. The next morning, Nozaki was seen lying on the ground as the sunlight began to creep out from behind the distant mountains. Nozaki looked up at the sky, knowing he hadn't slept a wink, but still feeling like he wanted to train more. However, that wouldn't be possible where he was, as the city was now awake. He went to the request board and felt like he had arrived at just the right time, as many jobs were still posted on it. That meant a job he was looking for might still be there. Looking past the people standing in front of the board, Nozaki jumped up in excitement and grabbed a piece of paper, then brought it to the guild receptionist. The old man was surprised by the quest Nozaki had chosen, a request to gather medicinal herbs. He felt that Nozaki was taking a request from one of their famous groups lightly. Nozaki smiled and explained that this mission would give him the chance to gather medicinal herbs himself to make his own healing ointment. The receptionist asked Nozaki how he had learned to brew potions, and Nozaki replied that it was thanks to learning from a pharmacist who had accompanied him on his journey to the city. The old man laughed and asked Nozaki to tell him more about how he did it, joking about whether he had tied them up and threatened them. Nozaki was confused until the receptionist explained that pharmacists usually don't teach their formulas unless the learner has been an apprentice with them for many years. Hearing these words, he began to recall the time he had with the pharmacist, Belle, wondering why she had passed on her knowledge to him even though they hadn't known each other for long. The receptionist completed the request procedures and informed Nozaki that his mission was ready to begin. Nozaki gathered what he needed and set off on his journey. Presenting his travel permit before passing through the city gates, he walked past many signs and a river, slowly but surely heading towards the forest he had become familiar with since being brought to this world. After a long walk, he finally found one of the herbs on the list, the gnarled herb. To harvest it, he needed to dig it up with its roots and wrap it in a damp cloth. After doing so, Nozaki felt like he would complete the mission in no time at his current pace. When he had finally gathered enough of the herbs for the request, he set his bag on the ground and stood up to continue practicing his physical skills. Now that he was in a quiet environment, he planned to review the optimization technique so he could move as fluidly as when he first learned the skill, even when the skill was deactivated. After doing that, Nozaki planned to learn about the effective range of his current karate skills, and possibly learn other skills that were latent in his body. He wanted to see if he could use certain skills and keep them activated while fighting, which would be a great advantage in the future if he could combine his karate skills and his presence sensing skill. Sighing in frustration, Nozaki continued to train, knowing there was so much he wanted to do. He paused, feeling the effects of staying up all night, but realized he was actually having fun while training. Suddenly, Nozaki sensed a presence near him, in the shape of a deer. He was confused as to why he could sense it, until his eyes widened, as he realized that not only could he sense it, but he knew exactly what it was without even seeing it. That's when Nozaki began to perceive every living creature in his vicinity, not with his sight, but with his sensory skill. Deer, squirrels, birds, spiders, lizards, worms, everything. Until now, his skill had only been a faint presence that he couldn't distinguish or characterize. But now, Nozaki could clearly grasp the form of each creature. This meant his sensory skill had evolved, and his information processing ability had increased. Nozaki believed he could truly become even stronger. He continued to go to the guild to take on more quests, and the guild receptionist noticed the hard work he was putting in every day. Nozaki explained that he wanted to prepare potions for the other members of his party, reaching for the paper for his next quest. However, the receptionist pulled the paper away from Nozaki's grasp. He was confused until the old man explained that he was being targeted. There were rumors of criminal gangs starting to flood the city, and people were hiding money to give to these groups who wouldn't hesitate to kill for it. The old man warned Nozaki to be careful of these gangs. That was all the receptionist said before Nozaki set off on another one of his quests. He walked through the city of Rockcliffe with his hood pulled over his face, glancing at the people around him, trying to shake the thought that he shouldn't see everyone as a criminal. While lost in thought, Nozaki walked past someone who was also wearing a hood, who started staring at Nozaki as he passed by. When he finally stepped out of the city, 3 men were following him. This didn't help with his attempt to stop profiling people. Nozaki was sure he was being targeted by these 3 men, and knew they were likely professional assassins, who had probably been tracking his recent activities. He decided to let them continue following him, and lure them into the forest. Nozaki led them into the forest and suddenly vanished from their sight, leaving them confused until he stepped out from behind a tree and asked what they wanted from him. The hooded man licked his lips and said they would let Nozaki live if he handed over all his valuables and told them where the others were. But Nozaki knew it was a lie. He replied that Gonz and the others wouldn't forgive anyone who laid a hand on a member of their party. One of the men scoffed, but Nozaki shouted out asking for Gonz's agreement, causing all three of them to turn their heads in shock. However, it was just a distraction, as Nozaki was completely lying and started to run away from them. The hooded man threw off his cloak and started chasing after Nozaki. Nozaki tried to think of his next move, as he knew he would be targeted by other criminals if he returned to the city. No matter what, you have to survive. And the hunt began. Nozaki kept running, while three men were still chasing him. One of them yelled for Nozaki to stop, which was really stupid, since what sane person would listen to someone trying to kill them and obediently stop? Nozaki began to notice the distance between him and the men gradually increasing, which was natural due to the difference in their armor and stamina. One of them got his foot caught in the ground, which meant there was an opportunity for Nozaki to counterattack. He quickly hid behind a tree and used his stealth skill to disappear from their sight. The bearded man was confused about where Nozaki had gone, not noticing the arm extended in front of him. Nozaki slashed the man's wrist, stunning him. The other two ran up behind their comrade. Nozaki kicked the man in front into the short-haired man, sending them both tumbling to the ground. The bearded man was still gasping for breath, being told to get off the man under him. Then Nozaki began to stomp on his leg, shattering it into pieces. The bald man swung his sword at Nozaki, but he was ready to test his skills without any fear. The blade was blocked by Nozaki, as he quickly pushed it away, and delivered a powerful punch to the bald man's face, causing him to fall to the ground shortly after. The fight was over in a short amount of time. Nozaki stood over his handiwork, recalling everything he had done in that moment. He grabbed the bald man's wrist, creating an opportunity to use his body weight, adjusting to deliver a left uppercut. Everything was executed perfectly in that moment. However, even though Nozaki had won the fight, one of them was still alive and was using a dagger to support himself. The short-haired man cursed before looking towards Nozaki, realizing he was still there and jumping up in a panic. He began to beg Nozaki to spare his life, promising he wouldn't fight back anymore, as tears started to fall from fear. Nozaki began to turn and walk back into the forest, while the tearful short-haired man watched him disappear among the trees. He sat on the ground with a broken leg, his arms crossed in front of his chest, frustrated with the situation. He thought he would remember this incident and come back to get revenge on Nozaki in the future. However, there would be no next time. Nozaki hadn't spared the man as he thought, but was actually just waiting for the right moment to deliver the final blow. He held a large rock, hidden among the trees, staring at it intently, before finally throwing the rock, ending the life of the last of the three men. After finishing the battle and collecting the armor and materials the men left behind, Nozaki went to find Al to discuss the situation. Al had heard that Nozaki had killed the last man and praised him for doing the right thing, not getting within sword range, as the man might have possessed a sword skill. Nozaki began to think about how impressive it was that the man never let go of his sword, even when facing death. Al started to explain that it was natural for adventurers as they felt intense competition with each other, since everyone in Rockcliffe was stuck at level 15. There were those who earned nothing and could only live off odd jobs. Among those unable to make a living, it was likely they would stoop to doing things like robbery. Nozaki felt frustrated knowing that this wouldn't be the last time people would want to harm him. Al explained that the motives of such people could stem from jealousy or the desire to take down a rival, and suggested Nozaki show off his strength until people were too scared to approach him. Al told him to sell the equipment he had taken at the market, both to make money and to display his power to others. Nozaki did as Al said and sold the equipment, earning a small amount of money. He silently looked at the small money pouch, and the man at the counter asked if the amount was enough, and Nozaki reluctantly agreed. He sat outside the building, still staring at the bag of money, and wondered if this was really the price of a life. His new life was now a battle for survival against criminals. When his moral contemplation ended, Nozaki returned to the guild, and was called over by Gonz and the others. Gonz asked for his opinion on selling the equipment, wondering if he thought it was an easy way to make money. Nozaki replied coldly, asking Gonz if he and the others were just trying to leech off of him. But Al explained that this was a chance for Nozaki to show everyone how he spends his money, and that he should buy everyone something to drink. Nozaki was still hesitant, but was told to shut up and just drink instead of moping around like an adventurer. Nozaki saw the logic in his words, and decided to go along with it, buying himself and everyone at the table a round of drinks. Toasting to their future, the ruckus they created made the gloomy feeling in Nozaki's chest disappear, if only for a moment. Nozaki's anxiety returned when he was pulled into a situation where Gans was ordering someone to hand over their belongings. His eyes widened and his jaw dropped in shock at the scene unfolding before him. Gans held out his hand and waited while the stranger in front of him looked confused, asking if Gans wanted money from him. Nozaki realized that from watching Gans's behavior, he'd learned that Gans was a true idiot. He was shocked that Gans could do this so calmly. Gans always acted on instinct, picking fights with anyone who displeased him and extorting money when he needed it. New adventurers were often taken advantage of and would hand over their money, even when they didn't want to comply. All of this was because Gans was stronger than anyone else in the city. Those who thought of resisting and tried to harm him would be dealt with easily. Now no one dared to oppose him, except for strangers who didn't know Gans's reputation. Nozaki was projecting his own strength just like Gans, in an attempt to prevent becoming prey for criminals in the future. He left the adventure, said goodbye to everyone, and mentioned he was going to gather herbs as usual. However, he didn't consider that others who acted like Gans would probably lose their heads, while Gans was able to live his life without any threats. Nozaki's questions were answered when Al approached him and asked if he was heading out. The answer was Al. Al had a hidden side to his appearance that people shouldn't be fooled by. In reality, he was a schemer. He had sources gathering information from all over town, acting as a personal information network that Al had built himself. If someone was planning to harm or kill Gans, Al would be the first to know and would find a solution. Al asked Nozaki what he was up to, and learned that Gans was extorting money again. But Nozaki was surprised that the person who lost the money was happy about the situation. Al explained that a rumor was spreading that those extorted by Gans would receive the divine protection of the war gods. Nozaki thanked him for the information and was about to leave until Al caught his attention again, informing him that the hair growth potion he was looking for didn't exist in the city. Nozaki was stunned and stammered, asking where Al got that information, confirming Al's identity as a schemer. Nozaki went about the rest of his day lost in thought, contemplating how he would build a name for himself in this world as someone to be feared, just like Al or Gans. While lost in thought, Nozaki noticed Kimon walking somewhere alone. Kimon was smaller than Nozaki, yet he was feared by everyone. This led Nozaki to believe he could use Kimon as a model for projecting his own strength, and so the plan began, 24 hours of observing Kimon's mysterious life. Nozaki began to tail the boy, until Kimon entered an inn. But Nozaki's confusion was interrupted when someone burst out of a window and ran past him. This person was muttering about a girl he might have killed, and then continued to flee. Then Kimon rushed out the door, shouting that he was tasked with protecting the girl. Kimon asked Nozaki for help in chasing the man. While running, Nozaki asked Kimon about the situation, and the boy said that the person they were chasing had brutally attacked a woman Kimon knew. She was seriously injured, which made Kimon furious, and ready to kill the man when he found him. They arrived at a building and hid, waiting for the man to appear, but he didn't move for a long time. Nozaki explained that the man was likely frozen in fear for having angered Kimon. Nozaki started to sweat from the exhaustion of using his present sensing skill for so long. Kimon noticed and suggested they storm the tavern, but Nozaki felt that would cause trouble, as the man might have connections in the area. Nozaki reassured Kimon that everything would be fine. Kimon understood and said they should keep waiting until the man moved. And so they waited patiently. Finally, after a while, the man started to get up and move towards the bar. Kimon stood up and readied his crossbow, his expression unreadable. Hearing Nozaki's countdown. As Nozaki's count reached 0, inside the building where people were happily drinking with their friends, the man Kumon and Nozaki were chasing was struck in the head by an arrow and fell to the ground, dying instantly. The girl next to him realized what happened and began to scream in panic. Kimon told Nozaki it was time to go back and check on the girl's condition. They arrived at the unconscious girl's bedside, with Kimon standing over her, glad that her condition had stabilized but disappointed that he couldn't protect her, as he had promised. Nozaki reassured Kimon that the girl would be fine, as he had been taught by the best apothecary in the city. He was about to leave the room when Kimon spoke up again, saying the girl was like a little sister to him, and that resemblance was why she was so precious to him. Nozaki remembered Kimon mentioning his sister before, that she had been sold into the market long ago. He left the building and realized that he couldn't use Kimon as a role model, even though he recognized that Kimon's way of showing strength was through assassination. Nozaki wondered if Kimon was the most feared of the three. This wasn't something Nozaki could imitate, and he felt he could only do things head-on. He sighed in frustration, realizing it would be a long time before peaceful days would come for him. Sitting in silence, Nozaki realized there was really only one way for him to show his strength. Al had said before that competition was fierce due to the level barrier, and perhaps that was one of the reasons for the high crime rate in this city. Nozaki looked up at the ceiling as he continued to think about the level barrier. As he was walking down an alley with his hood up, someone was quietly following him. The stranger drew a sword from its sheath as Nozaki realized what was about to happen. A few days after Kimon's assassination incident, Nozaki had experienced several attacks from criminals, making his heart race. He sighed, realizing another one had come to try and take him down, before quickly turning around and telling the man to bring it on. The scarred man stood there in silence, preparing to fight Nozaki. But Nozaki was completely unaffected by this exchange. They stood facing each other, neither moving an inch, as they both stared intently at their opponent. The scarred man held his sword straight out in front of him. That is, until Nozaki started to close in, causing the criminal to back away further and further. After a while, the man was forced against a wall and began staring at Nozaki, smirking contemptuously. Suddenly, Nozaki lunged forward, clashing weapons with him. Unfortunately, Nozaki's knife broke, which meant he would have to use his karate skills. However, Nozaki was already in hand-to-hand combat range, so it was fine. He planned to throw a left punch at the man, then realized he was even closer in attack range. So he delivered a headbutt to the criminal's chest, stunning him. Nozaki followed up with a punch to the same spot he had just headbutted, as the criminal tried to counter by elbowing Nozaki's arm. But Nozaki brought his hand up to the man's chin and flipped the criminal over, smashing his head into the ground, causing blood to spill onto the stone floor. After the fight, Nozaki stood over the criminal's body, wiping sweat from his face, impressed with his ability to close the attack distance. Because in this world, such things weren't taken seriously. He wondered how bad things would have been if he didn't have his experience from his life in Japan. After taking the criminal's equipment, Nozaki sold it to the shop that Al and the others had recommended. The man at the counter asked Nozaki if he was okay, since he'd been looking tired lately. Nozaki explained that it was because he had to live each day with the feeling of being targeted. The man thanked Nozaki for selling him the equipment, despite everything, and said his goodbye. Nozaki left the building and thought about how well he had blended into this world, able to move through the lawless areas of the city. As long as you stay on your guard, the slums are lawless areas, and it's crucial to be mindful when walking through there. The reason this place is teeming with criminals is because the organization's boss who controls this area has a direct connection with the feudal lord. Any money that the nation doesn't control is exchanged for immunity from the law. This meant it was a paradise for criminals, as they would be free from the hands of the authorities. However, despite its lawless reputation, it didn't give off the impression of a chaotic place. Perhaps due to the boss's management, the environment of the slums was no different from other areas of the city, and there weren't corpses lying all over the streets, at least not to Nozaki's knowledge, especially since there were suspicious bags scattered throughout the slums, seeping red liquids. But besides the hygiene issue, something else was going on here. The hair of the dead was made into wigs to be sold, or their bones were ground into powder for fertilizer, or used as ingredients for low-grade alchemy. Do not eat meat in the slums under any circumstances. Even though the slums seemed deserted, Nozaki always felt like someone was watching him. This meant he needed to keep his presence detection skill at maximum. Visibility was poor due to the haphazard construction of the buildings in the slums. Walking through these areas with the skill active, Nozaki felt the gazes of the residents like walking through a forest where monsters were secretly gathering. He wanted to get out of there as soon as possible to breathe a sigh of relief, without needing to use the skill anymore. Smuggling equipment is the main source of income for the people in the slums. A person could take it directly to a pawn shop if they didn't want to get involved in disputes over selling rights. Nozaki tried to calm himself, telling himself he had done well so far and felt like he couldn't sense anyone anymore. Finally, he let his guard down as he passed through the gate back to the normal part of the city to return to the guild. However, as he passed through the gate, he tripped over a strange object on the ground. The object started to move. But Nozaki paid it no mind as he walked past, as it just looked like another bag on the ground. In reality, it was a cloaked man pretending to be one of the bags. The man in the cloak mockingly thanked Nozaki for all his money. Before Nozaki could react, the criminal stabbed him in the stomach with a knife. Nozaki quickly countered the man with a kick and a punch, knocking the man to the ground. However, Nozaki himself wasn't any better, clutching his stomach in pain. Looking down at his stomach in shock, he realized that the moment he'd let his guard down after leaving the slums had gotten him seriously injured by a guy he suspected might be using some kind of stealth skill. Nozaki leaned against a wall and tried to walk, wondering what he was going to do about this situation as blood began to soak through his clothes. He cursed as his vision started to blur, wanting to try and reach a clinic before he passed out. However, before he could move any further, his vision worsened in an instant. Looking at his hands, Nozaki realized what was happening to him. He'd been poisoned. Frozen in place, he collapsed to the ground. His eyes still open, one hand still clutching the clothes over his stomach. He lost consciousness due to the effects of the poison and was left all alone in a random part of the city. Nozaki's body felt like it was sinking as he opened his eyes, wondering where he was. He remembered what had happened, how he'd been stabbed, and the feeling of sinking deep into his own consciousness. Nozaki fell into an empty void, until he finally landed in a mud-like substance. Nozaki stared in shock and confusion at the liquid around him as he began to sink into it. Then he noticed a hand formed from the liquid reaching out from the sludge. It grabbed Nozaki's body. As all the people he had killed also began to emerge from the sludge, their eyes glowing lifelessly, they accused him in unison, calling him a murderer, reminding him that he would be cursed forever for it. All the figures of the dead began to surround and pull Nozaki deeper into the liquid, until he could no longer see anything, and was now submerged in darkness. Nozaki lay curled up in a fetal position, hugging his body with his arms, shivering from the cold of this new place. He wondered if he was going to die like this, thinking that this was a murderer's punishment. It was true, he had killed people. He wondered if he would live forever with his sins piling up until he could no longer bear it. He felt tired of life, where in the end he had gained nothing and only had to face the evil people of this world. Despite claiming he had no attachments, as soon as those thoughts appeared, a light began to flicker in the vast darkness where he sat. A small dot of light appeared before his eyes. Nozaki opened them, realizing it was a memory from when he first entered this world. He wasn't a nobody. He had acquired karate skills and many other things throughout his journey. Another dot of light appeared, showing an image of him happily drinking with Al, Gons, and Quimon. It wasn't just bad people in this world. There were also those he had gradually grown close to. More dots of light began to appear before his eyes. But one of them caught his attention. The memory of Belle smiling. This made him realize his purpose and remember the feeling of wanting to live. Nozaki shot up, reaching out from the mud-like liquid, gasping for air. The figures of the dead began to pull him down again, but this time he had no intention of backing down. There was no way he was giving up now. He stepped on the faces of those he had killed before, determined to dispatch anyone who dared to stand in his way. Despite the curses and evil spirits, Nozaki leaped into the air, swimming out of the darkness. With all his willpower, finally he saw a light. He reached out his hand, stretching toward its warmth, and in the next moment, he was swallowed by it. Back where Nozaki had fallen unconscious, a woman emerged from a nearby building, heading to the store. She walked down the stairs and through the stone gate when she noticed someone lying on the ground next to the gate. When she realized it was a man, bleeding with a knife stuck in his stomach, she dropped her basket and ran to his side. She cried out, calling for anyone nearby to help quickly. Nozaki was still unconscious, but deep down he knew he would survive. Finally, he awoke from his near-death experience, slowly opening his eyes. However, the feeling of waking up in a bed, looking up at a wooden ceiling after being injured, was all too familiar to him. He realized where he was, and before he could say anything, a woman caught his attention. She told him that he had collapsed in front of the clinic, but Nozaki was focused on recognizing the woman as a friend of a girl he knew. That woman was Claren. She explained that although the knife wound was fairly shallow, a poison had spread through his body, making his survival a miracle. Nozaki thanked her for saving him, but Claren told him he should be thanking that girl. Nozaki's eyes widened as he realized who she was talking about. She explained that it was Belle who had found him and had been taking care of him for 3 whole days. He started to blush at the thought of Belle taking care of him, which confused Claren, as she was sure this wasn't the first time this had happened. She scoffed, wondering just what kind of person Nozaki was, before explaining that the poison had been flushed out and the wound had closed. Claren wanted to tell him to leave while Belle was still distracted, but she felt sorry for the two of them. Nozaki stood up, impressed that the wound had actually healed. However, he quickly turned to apologize to Claren, saying he planned to leave right after thanking Belle. Claren reminded him not to get any more involved with Belle than necessary. as the situation he'd been put in was getting worse. Nozaki nodded with a disappointed look on his face, as Claren walked out, half-jokingly telling him not to get stabbed again, and told him to remember to take the knife he was stabbed with. Nozaki's thoughts were cut short when his senses detected Belle approaching the door. She gently opened the door and stepped inside, her eyes fixed on Nozaki. From the doorway, he smiled back at her. Realizing that he was awake and okay, tears of joy began to fall down Belle's face before she gave him a smile. Nozaki had always thought her smile was cute and suited her best. He thanked Belle for what she'd done for him and smiled back. Claren was right. Getting stabbed in the middle of the street really did mean Nozaki's situation was getting more dangerous. If people thought Belle was close to him, she would be threatened too. Nozaki felt he needed to leave as soon as possible to protect her smile. He and Belle stood facing each other, feeling awkward by the stone gate. Belle handed Nozaki a pouch containing the antidote for the venom he'd been afflicted with, along with the recipe in case he needed to make it again. She told him to keep it a secret, and Nozaki thanked her, his eyes filled with joy just from seeing her. He took out a small gold coin to pay back all the money he had borrowed from her in the past. Belle looked at the pouch sadly, bowing her head low before hesitantly thanking him. Belle gave him one last smile before starting to leave, neither of them saying goodbye. Nozaki quickly returned to the guild, and was given a plate of food. He replied cheerfully, his eyes lighting up as he began to eat eagerly. Gons was walking with two women, laughing and chatting happily. Seeing Nozaki, he greeted him, and asked with a smile why he hadn't seen him around lately. Gons joked about whether Nozaki had found a woman to sleep with, but Nozaki quickly dismissed the speculation. He explained that he'd been stabbed with a poisoned knife and had to be hospitalized. Gons laughed loudly, saying that such situations were a real pain, and that he'd almost died from it a few times himself. He quickly sat down at a nearby table with the two women. Nozaki was surprised to see Gons take the news so lightly, thinking that perhaps it was normal for adventurers. Nozaki's thoughts were interrupted when he saw Kaimon holding the knife he'd brought with him and examining it. Nozaki explained that he could prove how sharp the knife was, since he himself had been stabbed by it, but Kaimon was too focused on the symbol on the knife and said it belonged to someone named Katso, a beggar and an assassin. After learning this information, Nozaki was still in shock when Al came to the table and explained that assassins usually only target nobodies. Nozaki was still lost in thought over this information and started coming up with various reasons why he would be targeted by an assassin, but Al quickly dispelled his worries by explaining that it was just for some spare change, nothing special, leaving Nozaki speechless. He felt a pain in his stomach, and Al suggested that Nozaki get some rest so they could celebrate his recovery on another occasion. Nozaki took his advice and stood up, but before leaving, he got the attention of Al, Kaimon, and Gunsmiyar to thank them. Kaimon was confused, and after Nozaki had left, he looked to Al for an answer, but Al didn't know either and just shrugged. Nozaki went to his room and checked his status. While nothing else had changed, he discovered that he had gained a poison-resistant skill. He looked at his level and lay down on the bed, knowing he needed to change his plans after being stabbed. Nozaki realized that no matter how dangerous the situation, he couldn't go on like this, or it would lead to his downfall. Nozaki remembered what the old man had said about having to hunt a level 4 monster with a weapon made of black steel to break his level cap. He decided that was exactly what he would do. After resting, Nozaki headed to a new building. The man at the counter was showing off all the weapons they had, while Nozaki was looking for one made of black steel. Nozaki stared at the black steel axe on the wall, breaking out in a sweat when he saw the price. He had guessed it would cost about as much as a light motorcycle, but it turned out to be the price of a luxury car. The shopkeeper explained that usually only the well-off, like the children of nobles or the young ladies of large shops, could afford black steel weapons. Nozaki was well aware that a commoner could never save up that enormous sum. Still wondering how he could possibly earn that much money, the man at the counter gave him a sweet smile and asked what Nozaki needed today. But that sweet smile quickly turned sadistic as he asked again if Nozaki was really just looking. Nozaki left the shop in frustration, realizing the man had pressured him into buying something when he only meant to browse. Still, what he'd bought might be useful in the future. Walking through the city streets, Nozaki wondered what he should do next, and how to get enough money for a black steel weapon. If he saved up the money, it would just mean he'd have to protect it that much more, and life-threatening. Nozaki needed to come up with a plan to earn all the money at once. He remembered that there was a meeting with the other members about their next quest that day. Nozaki was filled with excitement. However, the excitement quickly faded as the group sat around the table in silence. Al explained that the quest they would choose would focus on regaining their senses rather than making a lot of money. These words disappointed Nozaki, and he glanced at Gons, who had a similarly negative expression. Gons opened his eyes when he felt someone looking at him, but Nozaki had already turned away before he could notice. Al continued to explain the quests, until Gons suddenly stood up and left, announcing that he was going to the bathroom. Nozaki slammed his hand on the table, asking Al if he hadn't noticed Gons was in a terrible mood. But Al wasn't worried at all, as he knew Gons was upset because one of the women he'd been seeing had moved on to another man now that the money was gone. Al looked over Nozaki's shoulder and noticed something was happening between a group of adventurers and a woman who was holding one of the men's hands. This group was chatting happily about the quest they had just returned from. Nozaki realized that the sight of a loud, happy couple would not be a pleasant one for Gons, since he had just been given the cold shoulder by a girl he liked. The group sat down at a table and prepared to drink, talking loudly about their achievements and happiness. Nozaki knew what was about to happen when he realized the group was being extremely careless, even for beginners. He knew that those who didn't pay attention wouldn't survive for long. Gon stomped over to their table and yelled at them to shut up, then glared at the group. The man from the couple stood up and glared back, starting to threaten Gons, but he had no idea he was doing something very dangerous. Gons bowed his head in anger, tightening his grip on his weapon, but the situation was cut short by Nozaki. Nozaki stepped between the two men with a smile on his face. The angry man asked Nozaki what he wanted, but Nozaki just placed a hand on his shoulder, saying they should all get along. Immediately after, he drove his hand into the man's stomach, stunning him with pain, while making it look to everyone else as if Nozaki had only gently placed his palm on him. Nozaki made the situation look as if the man was trying to act like a prince in front of his girlfriend, but was trembling after being yelled at by a distinguished man like Gons. Nozaki continued the lie by tossing a bag of money towards Gons, explaining that it was a plea for forgiveness. Gons stared at the money bag as Nozaki said that the weak could not withstand Gons' extraordinary presence. All this praise easily made Gons blush, and he walked away with a shy expression on his face. Nozaki beamed, knowing his plan had worked. The girl from the couple went to her boyfriend and asked what had happened to him. Before starting to glare at Nozaki, he wanted the girl to realize that it was thanks to him that she and the others were still alive. Nozaki and Gons returned to their group's table. Al praised Nozaki for his actions, while Gons told Al that he would leave everything related to the quest to him, as they just continued the night with drinks. As they all drank through the night, Nozaki couldn't help but think that he had taken a liking to Gons. He felt happy that no blood was shed that day and thought that days like these should be happy ones, or at least that's how it was supposed to be. However, the reality was different. Nozaki was now on the run. He hid behind a tree as an arrow was shot towards him, narrowly missing. The archer yelled to the others about Nozaki's position and told them to quickly surround him. Nozaki started running faster, knowing full well that 8 adventurers were after his life, and ahead of him were dozens of goblins. He was surrounded by all sorts of enemies, including both humans and monsters. How did he end up in this situation? A footstep hit the ground as someone circled the forest, having lost track of Nozaki and asking the others if they knew where he went. He was currently lying under the dirt and tree roots, right next to the tree the man was standing near. While Nozaki cursed the adventurer's thoroughness, he wondered what he did to deserve this. Nozaki had developed a habit of training regularly in the forest, and had planned to go back there again since buying a hidden weapon from the shop earlier. But now he was suddenly being hunted. At first, Nozaki believed that the people chasing him were just fake adventurers looking to attack him for a bit of money, as Al had mentioned before. He temporarily let his guard down. However, this let him down. This hasty judgment would prove to be a grave mistake. The people chasing him surpassed his expectations, demonstrating a considerable level of skill. These men had blocked Nozaki's escape routes on 3 sides, meaning the only side left was to the west, deeper into the forest. However, that direction led to a goblin camp, so Nozaki was running out of options, and found himself in a dangerous situation. He began to realize that these men weren't here to kill him for money. He knew they were aiming directly for his life, because a small amount of money wouldn't be worth much when split 8 ways. He wasn't sure about these men's motives, but their murderous intent was obvious. Because these adventurers wanted Nozaki dead, he would still be in danger later, even if he managed to escape. Finally, he came up with a plan to make this forest his territory and bet his life on survival. He burst out of his hiding spot, as the archer shouted to the others to follow the direction Nozaki was running. Arrows were fired at Nozaki as he finally broke through the trees. Into the open area of the goblin camp, all the goblins started to notice Nozaki's presence as he charged into their midst and let out a battle cry. Before kneeing a goblin in the face and killing it instantly, his plan was to stir up the goblins to create a distraction when the adventurers entered the area. The group of men was still in pursuit and finally reached the goblin camp. Realizing that dozens of goblins were all around, holding weapons and shouting their own battle cries, one of the men told the others that they should retreat, but another said it was useless because the goblins' noses were too sensitive. Their only option was to fight. Nozaki's calculated plan unfolded with remarkable success, diverting the adventurers' attention from their relentless pursuit. Now, they were engaged in a fierce battle against the formidable goblin foes. Each of them displayed a resilience that cut through the goblin ranks one by one. One of the men seemed overconfident, boasting aloud about his ability to wipe out all the goblins, regardless of their numbers. But his arrogant words were cut short when he turned around and realized Nozaki was standing right behind him with a terrifying aura. The man had thought he was just another goblin. Nozaki quickly punched the man in the face and declared that he wasn't the goblin he thought he was. A swift and decisive punch. Nozaki grabbed the sword of the man who had just fallen and threw the weapon toward the shield-bearer as if it were a spear. The blade pierced through the man's leg, causing him to let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the air. Before he could even process what was happening, a goblin swung its club, landing a heavy blow to his head. He collapsed to the ground, and the goblin, without a moment's hesitation, pounced on him, relentlessly beating his defenseless body. Nozaki effortlessly kicked away one of the nearby goblins, scoffing at its weakness. He had anticipated a more chaotic battle, but it seemed this fight would be over too soon, despite him having only taken down 2 of them. He realized the power gap between the goblins and level 15 adventurers was just too wide. However, his expectations were about to be shattered, as Nozaki sensed a new presence behind him. From the top of the hill, a deafening roar erupted, instantly, drawing the attention of everyone present. All eyes turned to the hilltop, where a massive goblin creature had appeared. The booming sound was a rally cry to its brethren, unlike the familiar foes they had been fighting. These newcomers commanded attention. A massive hobgoblin, a goblin warrior, and a mysterious cloaked figure, soon to be revealed as a rare and powerful goblin mage. The unfolding scene left everyone breathless as the stakes of the confrontation soared to unimaginable heights. Fortunately, Nozaki had already scrambled up a tall tree, finding refuge far from the chaotic battle below. Clinging to a sturdy branch, Nozaki carefully observed the unfolding situation. A fleeting sense of security washed over Nozaki. He wondered what the men would do against these 3 new goblin creatures. 6 adventurers versus a goblin party. The battle for survival had begun.